Hi everyone, welcome to ELI, the place where you get your daily dose of inspiration for entrepreneurship. And today we have with us Miss Eela Dubey, co-founder of EduFund, investment app focused on higher education, providing parents with a roadmap on how to meet the financial requirements of university. Eela is a graduate of New York University and has worked for companies such as US Freedom Capital and Quest Partners. She's also a certified yoga teacher. I'm sorry, yoga instructor. Hey, Ella, welcome to ELI.
Hi, Priya. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. I think you covered everything there is to say about my background. So thank you for that. And I appreciate being on today's session with you and our future listeners.
Ella, I'd request you to again introduce yourself, the things what I have not covered.
Sure. You covered my work history pretty well, but I was born and brought up actually in the US. And I went to New York University, where I got my undergraduate degree. During my time at NYU, I actually was lucky enough to do some work in sustainable development policy, which actually sparked my interest in higher education. So that was where the seeds of my initial journey were, at least part of those seeds were planted. In addition to everything that you've mentioned, I started my career, my formal career actually, on Wall Street, working in investment management. And that was my first ever exposure working with finance and dealing with people's wealth and just asset management in general. And for a while, I really loved living and working in New York till ultimately I realized that I didn't want to be a career financier for the rest of my life. And it was in 2015 where I realized I needed some sort of change and variety. And I had this idea to move to India and start my career here, where actually I had taken a small hiatus from my professional journey. Like you had just mentioned, I was a yoga instructor, but I spent about a year and a half living on a yoga institute, working here, traveling, and teaching. And that was a nice sabbatical for my actual professional career in finance, where I took some time to really think about what the next step would be in my journey. And after that 1.5 year hiatus or sabbatical, I decided to re enter the world of finance, which is how I met my current co founder at our previous job, US Freedom Capital, in 2018. And that's when the whole idea of EduFund was formally conceptualized. And we decided to really think about it more strongly as an actual idea, an entrepreneurial journey. And in early 2020, we both decided that we were going to go for it. And that's how EduFund was founded.
How did you come up with this idea, linking education with the fund? How the idea came to you?
The idea actually came through a personal challenge that I faced financing my own higher education, as well as some of the exposure my partner Arindam and I had working with families in India and how they were going about savings. So that's how we clicked, the married the two ideas very strongly, that working with families really provided us some proof of concept. But just taking a few steps back, I was educated in the US and I did my university and undergraduate degree from NYU. And NYU, even 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, when I was starting my education, was really expensive. And I remember getting admission into this university, and it was my dream school. I mean, I wanted to go there. I had this feeling in my gut that I was going to be admitted, and I couldn't think beyond that university. For me, that was it. And so I applied with my heart and all this gusto, knowing that this would be where I was going to go to school. And lucky enough, I was admitted. But when I received my tuition bill, my parents were really shocked. to see that the cost of education from the time that they had gone to university, especially my father, who was born and raised in the US as well, saw that prices had escalated so much. There was such a discrepancy in the cost of university from the time that he went to college to when I was going to college. And they hadn't prepared as adequately as, they thought to. And, I had a parent who for about 10 years of my childhood was sick. So that parent was in and out of work. And so it just meant being more cognizant of finances, right? And when it came time to pay that tuition bill, it was a very hard no. And it wasn't that they didn't want to help me fund my dreams, it's just that they knew they couldn't. And so when I decided to go to university, and when I made that decision to go, I did it with a lot of awareness that it wouldn't be easy financially. And so what I ended up doing was I took some loans, which took me quite some time to pay back. I was lucky enough to receive a scholarship, so that certainly helped me. My parents helped me as much as they could, right? Which obviously was not the full $210,000 for 4 years of my education. And I worked 2 jobs actually throughout my entire university career, which was hard, right? It ultimately meant that I had to divide and juggle my time across going to university, going to class, working, interning, and then just, of course, taking care of myself. So it was definitely not easy for me to do, but I knew that there were people in a lot worse off situations. I had a classmate who actually was not able to afford his cost of living. And New York City is a very expensive city to live in, even as a student, right? And so he was unable to afford that cost of accommodation. And so for a while, he slept in our library until he ultimately got kicked out of the library. And he then started sleeping in the park till the police kicked him out of the park. And he somehow, made his way and was able to find accommodation. But this is a true story. And so looking at something like that is just a reminder of how financially burdensome a higher education could be, even though it should not be, right? I mean, I've always held the view that education should be accessible, right? And it shouldn't have to come with so many barriers, right? Especially when people want to be educated. And so that was a personal experience that was very close to my heart that I knew a lot of other people probably faced. And it ultimately took me 7 to 8 years to pay off my loans. I started a master's degree at Columbia University shortly after I graduated from NYU. This time I had no scholarship. And so it meant, again, taking out a lot more loans for a 2-year professional program. And for me, it was just very hard to stomach the idea that I'd have to take out more money in loans. And again, everyone is different. So I'm not discouraging, taking out a loan or being here nor there. But for me personally, because the whole concept of having to borrow money is a very personal decision. And so I couldn't do it. I couldn't be $120,000 more in debt for a 2-year degree than I already was. And so I started one semester and I dropped out of Columbia. And it was a really big decision for me because, I mean, not a lot of people do that, right? And so it was definitely a risk, but I said to myself, and even at the encouragement of my father, you need to go and you need to get a job and stabilize your source of income and pay off your loans. And then ultimately, if you want to go back and get a higher degree, you absolutely should. But think of your financial future and your financial health. And it was probably the best decision I made in hindsight because I was able to pay off those loans and I was financially free after 7, 8 years. So that's part of the personal journey that I would say ignited the idea of EduFund because I understood what so many other people faced, right? I completely got it. And then when I moved to India in 2015 and later started working in finance here with my partner Arindam, we were speaking to a lot of families in the space, as people working in finance and wealth management. And we realized that Indian parents are actually not adequately preparing for this journey. They may have a small corpus dedicated to their children's higher education, but they don't really give much thought to how much the cost of education is changing. And there's also a huge subset of people that aren't even financially preparing for this journey, right? And they're actually completely unaware that even in India, the costs of higher education, just for a basic engineering degree, could be anywhere from 3 to 4 lakhs a year and continues to go up, right? And so we said there's a lot of merit to this idea. And how do we get parents to start thinking about this? How do we inform them and give them the right idea of the cost of education, whether it's in India or abroad? But then at the same time, while giving them information, pushing them to do something about it, right? Because it's just information alone won't do anything. And so that's how we conceptualized EduFund. And we brought it all together on an app where we said, we're going to create this college calculator. We're going to ask parents simple questions about how old their kid is, where they want their child to study. If they have any idea, they may or may not know what they want to study. And based off of all these parameters, give them an actual estimate of the cost of tuition, how much their living expenses would be, right? All 5, 10, 15 years out. So look at the cost of inflation and say, in 12 years, when your kid is ready to go to university, this is a really rough estimate. I mean, actually, not even rough estimate. It's a near to close estimate of what your child's education fees are going to look like. And then we said, let's go one step further. Let's encourage them to invest and start what we call an EduFund, an education fund, where each month they're starting an SIP, and it can be as low as 100 rupees, right? It can be 100 rupees, 500 rupees, 1,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees, 15,000 rupees, as much as they can afford. But really promote that discipline and push them to make those disciplined investments each month in financial markets, right? Where that money can hopefully grow over 5, 10, 15 years, right? That money will compound over the life cycle of the investment. And by the time the kid is ready to go to university, they have some money saved away, right? A realistic amount saved away so that maybe they can cover the cost of, I don't know, a year and a half, or they can cover all of the accommodation fees, right? So the whole idea is something is better than nothing, right? And then we thought, but there's more to this ecosystem than that. And so let's go another step forward and actually help parents understand what that academic journey looks like. And so we've onboarded some really incredible counselors all throughout India that focus on education within India and abroad. And we've said, if the parents want to come onto our platform and connect to these counselors to help their children, they also have that resource to prepare them for certain examinations, SATs, college entrance essays and application processes. So all of that is aggregated onto our app. So we really saw through personal and professional experiences the value of marrying these things together. And that's how EduFund came to be.
Ela, speaking of the cost of education, you mentioned about your father's journey when he went through the education system, and also your journey through the education system. And you mentioned that the cost has risen up like anything. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the quality of education has gone up in a similar rate. In fact, this was one of the debates that happened during the US election last year. Uh, that the education is overpriced. I would like to understand your thought on whether the investment made on higher education is worth any more, or is it worth the same that it used to couple of years back?
Well, I think, first of all, the idea or the whole concept of going for a higher education degree is a very personal decision, right? And so there's no one metric that we can use to measure, or many metrics that we can use to measure that say the cost of education was 5 times more valuable 15 years ago than it is today, right? It has and will continue to be a very independent decision by parents and students alike to go and receive that degree, right? Now, for my father, 20 years ago, he was in a very specialized profession. He studied something very specific, in which case a degree was as relevant today as it was 20, 25 years ago, right? Equally relevant. So I think when we ask ourselves that question, we need to understand that the return on investment, the ROI, is very particular to the person and what their goals may be, right? I continue to feel that there is great merit in getting, at the very basic level, a bachelor's degree. I studied something, so I was a student of political science and international affairs, and my minor was French. And I can say that all of the classes I took, the content of the classes I took around my major, I realistically don't remember it, right? And it hasn't helped me much. The content of those classes hasn't helped me in my professional degree, because not professional degree, my profession, excuse me, because I don't work in politics and I don't work in international affairs. But that being said, um, and again, my exposure is just limited to the US, right? But the teaching pedagogy of universities in America is, for me, just a completely different level. The skills I learned while I was at university, I would not go back and change. And I would not go back and say, for me, it wasn't worth it. Yes, it was expensive. And I would definitely urge universities to be cost conscious, because it is a burden and it is leading to more and more people going into debt, right? Which is can be a very difficult thing for some people. So in that respect, it would be great for universities to continuously be aware of how much they're charging students, right? And being able to themselves justify it. But for me personally, I would not go back and change anything. I mean, my 3.5, 4 years at university were the best time of my life, and they taught me something that nothing else could ever teach me.
Uh, Ela, there is another question that comes to my mind, and it is about the COVID and the disruption it has brought to the education system. Now, what we are seeing is the education is getting more decentralized, and the best education doesn't necessarily come from a best university anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, are you speaking about India's situation in general, or are you speaking globally?
Both.
And are we speaking about higher education, like in terms of university, or are we speaking primary education? Because the concept of decentralization, I think, is something that's specific um, to India in a way, right? That may not be as relevant globally. So maybe if we can kind of target, if you're telling me primary, secondary, India, or globally, then
Uh,
that would
let's
help me answer the question.
let's consider the higher education as a context.
Okay, so I think COVID in general has made higher education learning outlets a lot more accessible, right? You basically everyone is learning virtually, right? That has not gone anywhere. Now, what I think will not happen, and of course, this is my view completely, I think with the rollout of, the vaccination, as countries start to see success in the vaccination, we'll see some sort of return to physical in classroom settings for sure. I think students actually crave in-person connection, right? I don't think even at the primary education level that going for too long without being in a class without people is going to be something that we can sustain. I don't think it's a self-sustaining model at all. In fact, I think there's a lot of merit to non-virtual in-class learning. And that's not just, okay, you're looking at a blackboard and you're studying and you're learning something. There's also learning that happens physically when you're with your peers, right? I think that's also very important. What I also don't think will happen is I do not think there will be a massive change in cost. I think the cost of university education will continue to go up irrespective of this online, virtual learning, because universities will then, they have to find other ways to justify their costs. If it's not in person and paying for their buildings, then it's probably paying for their servers and being able to host virtual sessions and paying for their professors, right? So I personally think, I mean, this is my view, but I know we talk about the disruption in education because of COVID. I think to some degree it will make our models more flexible because we know that online platforms are now available and they work. But I do not think that this will lead to a 180-degree shift in higher education. I just believe that humans have this innate sense of connection where they want to be with each other and learn from each other in a physical setting. And there are such medical advancements that are helping us. We seen in 9 months, 9 to 10 months. So I fans and we're going to go to a completely online education system.
Now we will talk about your journey as an entrepreneur. Ela, tell us how were the initial days of entrepreneurship? How did you first arrange all the pieces together to build a venture?
They were so hard and they continue to be really hard. A lot of sleepless nights, a lot of hours that get put into what you're building, and a lot of caffeination for sure. I mean, no one teaches you how to start and run a company. You can take all the advice in the world that you want from people, but at the end of the day, you have to have the conviction to figure out how to do it yourself. The hardest part about it is that it's unstructured, right? And so you're building something, you're building air. I mean, you take air and then you construct an idea out of absolutely nothing. And so what really helped me, I think, was just being extremely disciplined about having to figure it out. There are certainly days where you may question yourself as to like, what did I really get myself into? And so we have a lot of moving pieces, right? We have education, we have finance, and then we have technology. And my background is not in technology, and nor is my co-founders. And so we built a tech startup, an app, out of scratch. And not having a technical background meant having to put 3 times more of an effort to understand what this meant for us, and so the initial days were spent on a lot of research. How do we put everything together in a concise and clean product? How do we map out the vision of the app? So the initial days were tough, but if you're disciplined enough, I think anyone can do it. If I can do it, I think anyone can do it.
What are the different challenges you have gone through while building and growing this venture?
Sure. So I think one of the challenges I already mentioned was building a tech team and building a tech product. Not having to come from a tech background meant having to spend a lot more time researching and speaking to people in the industry, right? And learning how to construct that. And now that we have an app, it's a constant figuring out how to debug things and making sure the app is pretty and user-friendly, right? That's probably one of the most important things when you're an app, when you're a product-based company. The second biggest challenge that I found was hiring and retaining, I think, what I would say quality team members. That is so hard, and it requires a lot of energy. I did not use a recruiter at all. I didn't use a company or an agency. So I did all of the recruitment of the company. My partner and I, we did it together and by ourselves, which just meant a lot of time speaking on the phone. You know, I would say that one of the biggest challenges, and I've heard this from a lot of other peers in the space and other co-founders that I am friends with, is finding quality people, right? Who at such an early stage are willing to who are willing to take a risk trying to build an A-level product, right? And so it requires so much time and energy, but it also requires cooperation and teamwork. And you spend more time with these people, even if it's over Zoom or on a call, than you do your own family, right? So you just have to really get along, even in times where your visions don't align. You have to have enough respect for each other to be able to voice your disagreements. And that's one of the hardest things I've faced as a co-founder is really building a team who will come and share all of that with you. But I'm also lucky to have built a team like that. And so my team is fantastic. I mean, they're the root of EduFund's success. And it takes a lot of time to find those people, but if you find them, you know, you have to hold on to them. They're really precious. So yes.
Now, coming to the final part, or the final question, tell us what are the learnings you have uh, got as an entrepreneur, and we can take those learnings and share in our and apply in our own journey, or on our own venture.
I would say if you have an idea that you're really passionate about or that you keep losing sleep over, don't stop and keep pushing and keep following that dream or vision, right? You don't ever want to live in regret or I wish I had done this. So for me, there have been so many moments where, you know, you get tired. You can get demotivated. You, you can't expect founders to be perfectly happy and smiling all the time. You know, we're humans. But even in those moments, I think what keeps me going is just it's that thought. Something that has and hasn't still keeps me up at night or keeps me up way past my bedtime because I'm just thinking of how I can solve this or how I can do this better. Don't stop, you know. And there should be some sort of guiding light inside of you that keeps you along to keep doing, you know, slack if you feel like you consistently have to stay happy and perky all the time. Yes, you're probably going to be the biggest cheerleader of your company as a founder, but they're okay to have low moments. Build a team that will support you and will really understand what you're building, and give your team clarity, you know, especially the founding team and a team that joins you so early on, because that is the respect they deserve when they have maybe quit a job to join you so early in their journey as well. You know, treat them like they're founders as well, right? I mean, your team is your biggest resource, and your team, especially if you're building a product, your team is actually your product. You know, your physical product, whether it's an app, web app, whatever you're selling something, that's actually your second product. Your first product is your team, right? family or that A team, that dream team, whatever you're building, that leads you to the secondary product, which is your app or whatever it may be, right? So don't underestimate the power of a really good team, right? That uplifts you. And as a founder, have compassion, towards the people that you're dealing with. There are going to be so many times where you're frustrated, angry, sad, confused, maybe hopeless, or feel like you're just at a huge roadblock, and that's okay. But don't forget to have, compassion in the meantime, because that's what's going to carry you forward as a founder. So yeah, those are my main learnings.
I must say it was a great pleasure to talk to you and learn the different learnings you have had so far. Thanks for taking out time, Ela, and joining this session. I would like to say my best wishes for EduFund.
Thank you so much, Priya. It was very nice speaking with you as well.